The bigger question over here is that despite all the conversations and heated exchanges that we've been hearing about, there still is no consensus on the Russia-Ukraine war, no consensus on the communique. Now, in that, I'd like to know how and why has the West failed in isolating Russia? Why do I say that? Because Russia is still in the room, and in fact, you actually met the Russian Foreign Minister, Lavrov.
So first, I think it's very clear in a variety of ways that Russia is isolated in terms of its aggression against Ukraine. Go back a couple of weeks ago, 141 countries, 3/4 of the United Nations, stood up in the General Assembly and voted for a resolution condemning Russia's aggression and calling for a just and durable peace in Ukraine. Here at the G20, the foreign ministers meeting, if you look at the chair's statement that was put out by India, it reflects on the part of 18 of the 20 countries, that is every country except for Russia and China, the very language that was used by the leaders in the Bali meetings just a few months ago in terms of what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So I think world opinion is very, very clear on this. And in the meetings today, I think it's also fair to say that a number of countries again called on Russia to end its aggression. And, you know, this is a concern not just for Ukraine, not just for countries in Europe. It's a concern for the entire world because the consequences of Russia's aggression are being felt around the world. People are feeling it in terms of higher energy prices, higher food prices, and countries are feeling it in a different way because there's been an assault not just on Ukraine, but on the principles at the heart of the United Nations Charter, principles that are necessary for trying to keep the peace around the world, like one country can't simply go and try and take over another, erase its borders, erase its identity. So I think it's very clear where the world is on this, and that was reflected here again in New Delhi.
But the aggression continues, and there is no stopping them. G20 has not been able to. US sanctions have not been able to. So when we talk about isolation, we're talking about absolute isolation of a country that is an aggressor. And that certainly doesn't seem to be the case here.
Well, I think if you look at what's actually happened, the Ukrainian people, with a lot of support from countries around the world, have actually stopped what Russia was trying to do. Russia was trying to erase Ukraine from the map, to absorb it into Russia, to make it so that it didn't exist anymore. That has failed, and it's failed because the Ukrainian people stood up and because so much of the world came to help Ukraine in defending itself. Since then, since that initial attempt to eliminate Ukraine as an independent country failed, Russia has been pushed back in Ukraine to the east and to the south. The Ukrainians have taken back more than 50% of the territory that Russia seized from it early on in the aggression. Unfortunately, tragically, Russia is persisting. It's true, it hasn't stopped. But as it's doing that, it is suffering tremendously. President Putin has inflicted terrible damage not only on Ukraine, but on his own country. Public accounts say that Russia has suffered 200,000 casualties, killed and wounded in Ukraine. And he keeps throwing bodies into this war, a war of his own making. More than 1 million Russians have left the country.
Right.
They tend to be the most educated and most sophisticated in building a modern economy. 1,000 companies from around the world have left Russia. They're not doing business there because the reputational cost of doing business has gotten to be too great. So all of those things, as well as the sanctions and export controls, are having an increasingly heavy weight on Russia. But ultimately, yes, the objective is to get it to stop the aggression and to restore Ukraine's full sovereignty. And that requires that we continue to support Ukraine and continue to exert pressure on Russia.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.